All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's edition of SORTEE's workshop and webinar series. My name is Saoirse Kelleher. I'm the current chair of SORTEE's Education and Outreach Committee. Also with us today is Cecilia Baldoni, who runs SORTEE's Coding Club. In case you're new to SORTEE and this is the first workshop you've been attending in this series, SORTEE was created in 2020 with the aim of bringing together researchers working to improve reliability and transparency through cultural and institutional change in ecology, evolutionary biology, and related fields. We're the Society for Open, Reliable, and Transparent Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I will be putting in the code of conduct into the Slack channel as well. These workshops and webinars are open to everyone. And again, we'll be posting these recordings online for those who couldn't make it at the broadcasted time. If you're not a member of SORTEE and you would like to join the Society, it's very easy to do. You can visit the join link on the SORTEE website, which I believe Cecilia has just put into the chat. There are options as well for people who are doing postgraduate studies and so on. You can find out more about upcoming webinars on the SORTEE website's events page. And we are a community of practice with an online presence on Slack, Twitter, Mastodon, and so on. We have an annual conference coming up in October and a preprint server on EcoEvo archive. Moving into today's session, our workshop today is going to be a bit of a bonus session of the SORTEE workshop and webinar series presented in collaboration with SORTEE's Coding Club. This is going to be the first of a two-part series on Quarto, the open source language for scientific and technical publishing. But before we get into it, Cecilia, did you want to say a few words about the Coding Club real quick?
Of course. So this year I am with Corne, which is also here in the link in the webinar today. We are running Code Club, which is a very informal, very open space for people who want to learn about. Mostly we talk about R, but it's really about transparency, reproducibility in science. We run the Code Club once a month, every Tuesday, and the time varies because SORTEE is worldwide, so we try to accommodate most, if not all, time zones. I will paste now in the link here in the chat the Code Club schedule, so you can see what we work on and what if there's some here I am. Some events you are interested in, but just a tiny reminder, Code Club is only open for SORTEE members. Joining SORTEE, it's very easy and you can do it anytime. So to have the link to next week Code Club, the second part of this Quarto series, you will need to join SORTEE, and then you will receive a link to the Slack of SORTEE, and you will receive then the Zoom link to join. Yes, I think that's it. So I give it back to you.
Yep. So like we were saying, today is the first part of a two-part series on Quarto. In this first one, we'll be introducing Quarto and really talking about the basics of what it is, what it has to offer the open science community, and we'll do a little bit of a brief demo on the fundamentals that you're welcome to follow along with if you please. Next week in Coding Club, we'll be going a little bit further into how Quarto can be used to create things like scientific manuscripts and really just spending a bit more time hands-on working with the framework. As we go along, feel free to throw any questions in the chat. With a small group, we'll also open up things to questions later when we move into the demonstration section on the back end of this talk. So yeah, going into it. Today, we'll be talking about Quarto for reproducible analyses. And the first thing to think about is, what is Quarto? In their own words, Quarto is an open source scientific and technical publishing system. And at its core, Quarto is really an all-in-one framework for blending together code, text, markdown language, and more to create useful and visually pleasing outputs. It lets us work with a bunch of different programming languages like R, Python, observable JavaScript, Julia, and several more. and use the shared structure to build documents in a variety of output formats, HTMLs, PDFs, Word documents, and again, several other different formats in various structures. So Quarto is really the bridge between all of these different coding and analysis tools and all of these display and publication tools on the other side. Quarto is extremely flexible. By learning it, you can use the same skills to produce a ton of different useful types of outputs. And before we get into the how it works bit, it's probably easiest just to show you some examples of what we can do with Quarto. So we'll walk you through a few samples, all of which are taken from the Quarto gallery on the Quarto website here. Can post that link in the chat later. But if we go back, the first basic type of document that you might expect to see and may have seen in the past are these simple documents, which come in a variety of formats. So we have these simple HTML documents, which have a lot of really convenient features. These open up a lot like a website and allows you to use typical website things like tables of contents, interactive elements, links between different parts of these documents, and so on. We can also include things like interactive plots, which can't really be used in static documents. So quite a powerful feature of these HTML document types to allow us to move around and change what we're showing in this live document. However, we release the presentation. There we go. We also occasionally need some form of static document, like a Word document or a PDF that can't realistically be presented as this dynamic HTML. Think things like scientific papers, reports that need to be permanent and non-reactive. Quarto also allows us to render these types of outputs. For example, this Microsoft Word document produced through Quarto. And all of these different document types can be produced from the same original source Quarto document. So you can write up the same thing with all of the code and different elements in Quarto, and then publish it into a variety of different outputs. So you can have the same Quarto document produce a HTML page like that first one we looked at, a Word document like this one, without having to change the underlying structure. Another powerful output on offer is dashboards. You've probably interacted with some form of Shiny or JavaScript-based dashboard before. This example shows recent earthquakes in New Zealand, and there's a few interesting things going on here. So you have this live update table that's pulling from some API. You have these little widgets showing the key features of the data, and you have these nice interactive features like this drag and drop map that lets you look at different details. So again, a very visually pleasing output that really on the back end wouldn't require all that much code. Increasingly, Quarto is the most popular way to create websites in a lot of the data science community. Even things like the Quarto website are generated fully through Quarto. So everything you see here was produced within the Quarto language with any of the features you would expect from a far more dedicated website development tool. Similarly to websites, we see an awful lot of these open source books like R for Data Science being published from within Quarto. I won't click into this one, but it acts very similarly to a website, but with a lot of convenient rendering features that allows people to create really nice, useful websites like this without having to dive into the whole web development side of things and having to learn completely new languages. All of this would have been written in a combination of Markdown and R. So really allowing people to use the skills that they already know for data science to produce these really convenient, nice publishable outputs without having to learn a whole new thing. We can also do presentations. This entire presentation would have been written in Quarto with a lot of other nice features, like being able to include runnable code or interactive features that can't really be done in PowerPoint. So in short, Quarto is just a really flexible way to use the same underlying structure to create this huge variety of outputs that are easy to share and present to others. Some of you who've been working in the space for a while are probably thinking this looks an awful lot like R Markdown. You'd be absolutely right. Quarto is fully a successor to R Markdown. It is developed by many of the same people who created the original R Markdown tools. Um, However, it's not just built on top of R Markdown. It's a complete rewrite of the guts of how it works and how it processes code in Markdown language, which gives a lot of really great advantages that R Markdown just wasn't really able to handle. For example, Quarto has native support for languages aside from R, including Python, Julia, and Observable.js. Um, R Markdown was able to work with Python, but it was a bit more bolted on. It wasn't quite native, and it didn't have all the features available it had for R. So that's a huge advantage, being able to use all of these language often within the same document. Quarto also now supports a lot more output formats without requiring extensions. Those of you who had previously used R Markdown might remember that there's this whole constellation of different packages that added bits and pieces onto R Markdown. For example, Bookdown or Flex Dashboard that let you create similar things to those books and dashboard outputs I was showing earlier. Um, Nowadays, all of this is baked into a single thing in Quarto, and we don't need to go reaching for all of these different tools, although there's still extensions available for things that Quarto can't do quite yet. One more thing to note, our Markdown documents will generally still work with Quarto. You can actually just change the file extension from RMD to QMD, and most of the time they'll work completely fine. And if you already learned R Markdown, it would be a very easy transition. All right, so going a bit back closer to SORTEE's mission, why Quarto for open science? What does it have to offer us as a community in the reproducibility and transparency space? I'd say there's three big reasons that we'll go through one by one. First off, it's built for open source tools and languages. Second, it helps us share work quickly and transparently. And finally, it puts our analysis and our writing side by side, which has a lot of big advantages. In terms of open source tools, Quarto itself is fully open source, and it's developed by Posit, which is a company, but it is also the developer of RStudio, the Tidyverse, etc., and has made strong commitments to the open source science community. It also has strong support for those other languages, which are all also freely available, don't require any licensing to use these tools. Um, and because it is open source, there's a lot of room for these third-party extensions to add even more features. So it's you get the advantages of open source tooling where it's easy to modify and adjust to your needs, but it's still backed by an organization that's made strong commitments to maintaining and improving these tools over time. The second advantage is that Quarto makes it really easy to share work quickly. It's easy to publish Quarto documents directly to hosting services like Quarto Pub, which is free, GitHub Pages, which is generally free for public repos, and Posit Cloud, which is, I believe, generally does require a plan, but it's becoming increasingly popular for a lot of enterprise users. But even if you're not hosting these documents online, you can also just share them as standalone files. I'd say that most of the content that I share with the people I work with and with supervisors, I share as documents that I created in Quarto, whether that's dashboards or write-ups or even drafts of manuscripts. And I find that it can often be a lot more accessible than raw code. You're not sending them a annotated script. There's some people who might want to see a little bit of the work, but don't necessarily want to completely dive into a gigantic R script. So it can be nice to send somebody a document that has bits of the really important code, like the mathematics and things that they might want to see, without having to completely go into it. Finally, I personally think it's quite important to combine the analysis and writing in the same place. I think it has a ton of value for transparency. It not only allows you to show your work and show what you're doing, but it also allows you to share your thought process. By putting the analysis code that you're doing right next to your writing, you're really tying those two things together in a powerful way. I find when I'm reading documents that people have written in Markdown, it's much easier to follow why they're doing each step because they've taken the time to write it out in a appealing way. That's not always the case with comments. And yeah, just another powerful end-to-end solution where we're using the exact same tools to do our analysis as we are to produce our outputs. So just keeping that like chain of the workflows that we do in research from start to finish in the same place, it makes it a lot easier to follow someone's process the whole way through. I also find that doing analyses in Quarto is a great way to prepare for publishing our code. It kind of forces us to keep things straight and keep the final product in mind as we're going through analyses. And then once you get to the end, it's a lot easier to publish things if they're already in a nice markdown format that can be distributed. So going into the basic building blocks of the language framework structure. Anyway, Quarto's got these three main building blocks. It's got metadata, also called YAML headers. It's got markdown components, including text and other elements. And we've got code blocks, which allow us to do the computations. We'll go through each of these here briefly and then jump into a live demo in a couple minutes. But starting first with the metadata. Like mentioned, this is also called a YAML header. YAML stands for yet another markdown language. Alternatively, YAML ain't a markdown language. Bit of a backgronym. I don't think anyone quite agrees what it is. Each document has one of these YAML headers, which is bookended by these three dashed lines at the top of a Quarto markdown script. This includes some basic metadata things like the title, the author. You can throw an abstract in here. You can include the date something was written. Tons of different things that'll get thrown into the header of the document. But it also tells Quarto how to render the document. So the important thing here is establishing a format and defining some options for the format. So in this case, I'm telling it that my format is HTML. And for my HTML output, I want it to use this theme. We'll explore some of these other options later, but the point here is that these headers at the top of the document are just telling Quarto what it should be trying to make. Since, again, the structure of what the code and the text looks like is going to be very, very similar. You could actually change this HTML to reveal.js, and your HTML document that I was originally going to output would turn into a presentation, and that would fully work in a decent amount of cases. So again, the Quarto Markdown language itself is very, very similar for all of these different outputs. So telling it what it needs to make is an important step. The other two elements that we have in Quarto documents are Markdown and code blocks. So Markdown isn't really just a Quarto thing. It's a standard language for formatting text across a variety of platforms. A few different languages of Markdown, but the one that Quarto uses is quite popular in other structures. At its most basic level, it's just a means for formatting plain text. So you would put in an input like this with little tags like these asterisks to instruct Quarto to render these in a different visual way. So in this case, one set of asterisks makes words bold, two sets makes them italic. So you put in plain text like this, and you get out nice formatted text like this. The flavor of Markdown Quarto uses also allows us to include other rich elements. For example, we can include an image with a simple line like this that would result in the inclusion of an image like this. We can also add things like formulas using LaTeX syntax. Again, very important for those of us doing statistical things. This lets you do a lot more than a lot of the other tools for rendering mathematical and statistical text. I find these days I actually write most of my papers in Quarto because it's easier than dealing with Word or LaTeX for a lot of the formulas and things. We can also include things like simple tables using this HTML pipe format thing, where you can put in the structure and end up with something like this. So again, these are just a few examples of the types of rich elements you can include using Markdown text to create nicely formatted outputs. Beyond things that we're just including via Markdown, we also have code blocks to fully incorporate code and analyses in documents. With these blocks, we can choose whether we want to include just code, just output, both. We'll explore that more in a couple minutes. Quarto supports, again, R, Python, Julia, Observable are the four main languages, but there's a few other bits and pieces from other coding languages and language adjacent things that can be included. They're continuing to add support for a lot of these as well. Code blocks are defined within these little fences. So this just delineates a single piece of code that will produce an output. So we do have to tell it which language we want, and then give it the code that we want it to run. Again, we can decide what we want to include from this code, whether we want it to show just the code without the output. So in this case, I've instructed it using these little tags to echo the code, so show the actual code that it was running, but not actually include the output. So in this case, I just get this little bit of code. People can even copy it if they want. But I can also change these tags to, for example, produce the output, but not show the code. So in this case, we're only getting the output side of things, but it's not actually going to show the code itself. We can have it show both of these things, like so. This is really useful for writing things like tutorials or documenting your workflows for supplementary information. And we can tell it not to do either. In this case, I believe it still runs on the back end. The code will still run inside the Quarto document, but none of that is going to be included in the final document. We can also use code to create figures and things directly from within a Quarto document. So just a simple ggplot here being created directly from this bit of code. So again, for things like writing papers, you just render this straight into the document. You don't need to go save it out and then load it back in as a figure. And for some outputs, like HTML documents or these reveal presentations, we can include interactive elements like these maps or widgets that are just based on, in this case, pure HTML. Again, that was a very quick just blow through some of the different things we can include in these documents, more just to show the flexibility than anything. But at this point, we're going to hop into a demonstration showing what this actually looks like in practice, working from within our studio to create a simple Quarto document. Just open mine up real quick. And all right, so just from a fresh RStudio pane here, and again, you're welcome to follow along. I will note that if you've never installed Quarto before, you would have to install it for these documents to actually be able to render. That's available on quarto.org, but it's generally a pretty straightforward installation process. As I would with anything else, I'm just going to quickly create a new empty project just to keep things straight for a second. Yep. And just as a blank project there. Right. So to create a new document, I can just go right up to the menu up here and initialize a Quarto document from there. And it'll pop up this little menu here. So it gives me a couple options to customize. So it lets me choose the main document type, whether I want a document, presentation, or a interactive Shiny app type dashboard. In this case, I'm just going to stick with the document, call it SORTEE demo, and put my name in the author. And I can choose between HTML, PDF, and Word documents. HTML tends to be the most straightforward and has the most features available, but we can look into one or two of the others later. When we create that document, Quarto will automatically populate it just with some sample text and code just to show us what some of this looks like. From here, we'll just go through a little bit of the anatomy of this document, see what we're looking at before we start writing some of our own material. So up here is the metadata, the YAML header that I was talking about earlier. So we can see these key value pairs for different attributes of the metadata. So we can see our title, SORTEE demo, the author, my name, and then here we can see format HTML. So this is telling Quarto to render an HTML document. We also see this little flag for editor visual. This is a important little note about editing Quarto documents from RStudio. RStudio offers two different ways of looking at a Quarto QMD document. We have the visual editor, which we're in now, which is somewhat pre-formatted. You can see these large headers. We have active links. We have these code blocks formatted and this outline showing up on the side. If we switch to source, we can see what this document actually looks like within the script. This is the plain text version. It's still got a little bit of highlighting and things, but this is what this Markdown script actually looks like at its core. So again, we have the header fenced up here. We've got different headings here with symbols like these hashes to indicate formatting, in this case, making it a header. We've got some code blocks down here. Other things like Markdown annotation to make this into a link. And we can switch back and forth between these. And often that is how we work with Quarto documents, is moving back and forth between the visual editor, which is much easier and more convenient to work with, and the source editor, which lets us do some more finagly things like messing with columns and formatting and things. The other thing that we'll see from the main editor pane here that you wouldn't see with the normal R script is this render button right here. This will take the Quarto Markdown document on the left-hand side here and render it into the actual output. So clicking that, it'll probably ask me to save this. Yep. But once I do that, I can render this document. And once that's ready, I'll start to see this output on the right-hand side. So everything up here at the top comes from the metadata in the YAML header. And then we can see this next block of Markdown text here. And we can see this little R code block here, which in this case has shown the code and then its output below. We're going to go ahead and delete everything that Quarto's automatically filled in for us here so that we can write some of our own material. So looking at the header, and sorry, one more thing. As we go through this, often we want to render the document as we go repeatedly, partly to make sure that we haven't introduced any errors that's going to prevent it from running, and partly just to see what things are going to be looking like as we move along. So going back into the metadata YAML header thing here between these three ticks, again, there's hundreds of different options available depending on the format to change different features of how this document is rendered. For example, I can set the date, which will be included at the top of the document. It says it's 2001. That's interesting. If you don't do the year, it will fill it in. I can also change things that are specific to the format. So the YAML headers can be a bit finicky. They do have to be indented properly, and there's some nesting going on for attributes of specific document types. So say for this HTML document, I wanted to change the theme, the visual appearance. I'd have to do something like this, where it's telling it, for the format HTML, make the theme it's one of them. There's a list of about 30 of those available in the Quarto documentation. Or more obviously, if I wanted a dark theme, I could set it to this. Yeah, so within this YAML header, we're mostly doing things that affect the whole document, that are affecting how this document is being rendered. I'm going to switch this back to a light mode theme, just because I was having issues with this earlier. But yep, here we go. And where'd that go?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks. I always struggle with this beautiful EML part in terms of for indexation. Most of the time, I copy paste from other document in the web, but then there's the problem. So, do you have any advice in this sense, or
Yeah, I
it's
think the YAML headers are definitely one of the more fiddly bits. They can be really, yeah, no, they can be difficult, partly just because there's so many different options. It's an incredibly powerful part of the document. You can do a huge amount here with different theming things to create really gorgeous documents, but sometimes it can be a pain. One of the big things, yeah, is the nesting. Um, but honestly, what you were just saying there about copying it from other places, that's really not a bad way to go, just to get an idea of what it looks like. Um, I tend to keep it pretty simple for the most part. Often, mine isn't any more complicated than this. Often I find I don't need that much more for simple document types like this. Um, but yeah, at the end I'll go into some of the reference material because I think that is one of the advantages of Quarto is a really strong documentation. Um, so moving from the YAML header into text and components like that, one of the things that's really nice about Quarto, particularly from within our studio, is that we have a lot of options up here that are very similar to what you might see in a standard word processor. So for example, I can create a heading here. So um, I can set that to a header text at different levels. So I can make it a smaller header. Um, I can make it italic, make it look like code, and so on and so forth. So a lot of flexibility there in changing the visuals without necessarily having to do the markdown yourself. Because in reality, this is flagged with hashes to make it a heading because that's how Markdown does it. But you don't necessarily need to look at that directly most of the time if you're working from within the visual editor. We can also just do standard conventional text. So just a, and Markdown offers a lot of different options for things like lists. We can also get really easy access to a lot of the other Markdown elements that we might want to include. So things like images, we can easily add with options like this, navigating to, oops, different files, for example, to add in images directly from file. Again, offering some nice convenient things like alignment, adding captions, and so on, just directly from these menus here. We can also easily add other bits and pieces of these markdown elements from the insert options right here. So we can see options for tables, figures, links, blocks of code, citations, which we'll get more into next week, LaTeX math, and tons and tons of other options. So for example, a table we can insert from either of these menus, just with some basic information. For example, if we wanted to a list of trees, we could easily add a table here that, oh no, I'm going to forget all of these. But we can easily add a table directly from the Quarto menus that we can see in the source editor is showing up as this markdown piped table thing. So again, much easier to work with things like this in the visual editor, but we do tend to go back and forth between the two. Again, as we go along, it's always good just to hit these render buttons and see what things are starting to look like as we move through. As I mentioned earlier, formulas are another place where Quarto has some really strong capabilities by being able to add formulas directly through LaTeX. We can do this in a couple ways. So we can do formulas in line. Again, I can just go up to the insert menu to add something here. So within these dollar signs, I can put in a formula. So, you know, and the visual editor will automatically format that correctly. And we can also do block formulas below using the display math option. So something like that. Whoop. Which will render in the middle. So again, a lot of capability here to take advantages of the stronger points of LaTeX, particularly rendering math, without having to go fully into LaTeX for the more complicated aspects of publishing. So moving into the other main type of content that we have, code blocks. Got a bit lost. We create code blocks using this triple tick format. So 3 ticks, brackets, the language, and then if we hit enter, it will auto-complete it. And looking in the source pane, we can see that we've created this block between these 3 tick mark fences. From there, we can type any R code we want. Again, in this case, we've declared that it's R. We can also run the code from the Quarto document within Quarto here so that we can preview the outputs. This functions like any other R script. And then when we hit render, it will run it again for the final rendering of this document. By default, Quarto will show both the code itself here and the output below. One of the really powerful features of these code blocks is the tagging system, which allows us to change attributes of how those are rendered. So tags in Quarto are indicated with this hash type syntax. And the ones that we use most often are the echo and output tags. So first off, echo determines whether the code itself will be shown or if only the output will be shown. So if I change it to echo false, it will no longer show this 2x2. So we can see that it's only put out this output. It hasn't shown the code like it did in this first code block. Alternatively, we can change the output tag, which will suppress the output while still showing the code. Oops. So in this case, we're still going to see that 2 + 2, but we'll no longer see the output of that code. Again, this is most useful for doing things like writing things like tutorials, where you might not necessarily need to actually run the code, but want to show an example. It can also be useful for documenting workflows that take a really long time to run, for example, really large models. It can be convenient to show the code that was used to run the model, but suppress it from actually being run to make it easier for someone who's looking at the same document to avoid having to do those longer steps. So one of the powerful things here is that we can include any type of output that's made by code. So for example, we can render a table output directly from a data frame. So if we create a new R code block here and just load a couple packages for a data set, we can load the first few rows of this penguins data set here. And when we render it, it will show that entire, those first 6 rows of that table as an output. Oh, it's annoying. But from here, we can see that when we run this R code, the table output is being thrown directly as text into this Quarto document. We can also easily do the same thing for plots and figures. Yeah. So again, from the same, from the same penguin data set, we can make a simple ggplot. And this will render with a reasonable, oh no. Anyone catch that?
Is it body mass the problem? But body mass, yes.
Crazy?
Weird. Ah, but is it loaded before? Huh?
Yeah, it was loaded.
Yeah. This to
Yeah,
demonstrate
this
that
is
even
on,
that
this
even
is on, yeah, this they added the penguins data set to base R a couple weeks
this is
ago.
what you were telling me the other day with the new
Yeah,
R
and I
version.
ended up doing the
Yes.
same thing. Yep, that should work. Yeah, they added this data set everyone's been using to base R, and it keeps messing up people's demos. But anyway, we can easily add ggplots directly from R like this. Again, this is one place where the tagging system has a lot of capability. Quarto will by default choose a reasonable size for these figures that will scale with text, or scale with the size of the document, which is quite convenient. Sometimes it's not quite right, or sometimes you need something like a different aspect ratio. But we can change all of that very easily with the tags here. So for example, I can change fig width to 9 and the fig height to 3. And this will change it from the default 7:5 aspect ratio to a 9:3 aspect ratio. So this will make it much wider. So there you go. So again, a lot of capabilities here for rendering these figures. We could get into a ton of stuff here about how to add captions and auto label figures and things like that, but we'll save that bit for next week. One of the last things I want to cover is some of the really convenient extensions that Quarto offers that I think really enhance the capabilities here. So you might have noticed this first table that we loaded. It's plain text. It's pretty ugly. It's not the most appealing. There's a few different ways of getting really nice tables from Quarto using third-party packages. So one that I quite like is Reactable, which lets you make these nice interactive tables where you put in any standard data frame and you get out an interactive table like this where you can navigate through the different pages in the HTML output. You can also sort, so you can find the biggest penguin, which is apparently 6 kilograms. Good to know. But again, a lot of capabilities here for customizing these tables, adding search functionality, and so on. The Great Table package also has a lot of really nice features here that play nicely with Quarto now. They've fixed a lot of the bugs. Another thing that we can mention here is the potential for interactivity directly from these HTML type documents. So I showed a version of this earlier with the leaflet package, which allows you to include interactive maps from directly within Quarto. In this case, we can just add in a couple lines to add some map tiles from the leaflet service and add a marker on, I believe this was Antarctica. And we'll get a really nice HTML map that we can interact with directly. So the really cool thing with these leaflet options and a lot of the other interactivity that you can do from Quarto is that they do not require a server backend. So many of you have probably interacted with things like Shiny apps. Shiny apps are great, but for them to work properly, they need a server on the backend running all of the code. So it's going back and forth from the document to Shiny, doing some processing, throwing it back to the document. So you need to have that server working to do it, which can make it a lot harder to host, makes it a lot harder to share if you're not willing to pay for the computer to do that. These leaflet pieces and other HTML widgets that you can include in these documents, they're fully interactive, but they do not require a server. Everything that this needs is included within the HTML document. So you can run this on your own computer without requiring that server backend, which opens a lot of doors for interactive content. I often include these in documents that I send around to collaborators, just with a map of all the sites. Makes it really easy to get your head around things. And Leaflet's just one example of hundreds of different extensions for Quarto that add a lot of really, really powerful features like this. I'm just going to throw back to our presentation here and just a couple more things to flag before we go into questions. For one of the big strengths of Quarto, I think particularly compared to our Markdown, is that the documentation is quite good. On quarto.org, there's some really, really great materials under Get Started for just going through a lot of the basics in your own time in any of these languages. And the guide section has a huge amount of documentation for how to do different things for all of these different formats. So you've got things that are universal Markdown things under authoring, universal computation things and language-specific features. You've got very, very detailed documentation on all of the different output formats that are available in each of these frameworks. So for documents, presentation, dashboards, there's a huge amount of material here for how to do whatever you need to do. So just looking, for example, at the Reveal.js one, which is what this presentation today was based on, you have a huge amount of content here for how to include all of these different aspects of these documents. Beyond that, there's also the reference section. This is less detailed and self-explained compared to the guide, but this includes a lot of the things that I believe Leonardo was talking about earlier about how to deal with YAML headers. So this whole reference page includes all of the different things you can put in the YAML header for the HTML document, which is hundreds and hundreds of different things that nobody's ever going to memorize. But again, it's a huge advantage for a framework like this to have such robust documentation and such a large amount of material available, especially given that Quarto's only been out for about 3 years. So there's quite a lot here already. They're continuing to add more features. Another thing I find quite useful is the gallery, which includes all of those different ones I was showing you earlier. Looking at these files and the code that was used to make them can be really helpful way to learn. Just seeing how other people did similar problems and constructed their documents, I find quite helpful. The last one out, last resource that I'll flag is this Intro to Quarto workshop from POSITConf 2024. These were full-day workshops, so much longer than a 1-hour crash course, but they cover a lot of great material, and all of this material is freely available on the workshop website to work through in your own time. So they cover, yeah, good chunk of basics, documents, extensions, presentations, and so on. Cecilia, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on resources.
Yes, I think if you then want to share this presentation anyway, maybe we can add some. But I think, as you said, from the website, the Quarto documentation is insanely good. I think I've never seen anything else that it's so thorough. Also, the community around Quarto is pretty big and it's all open, and you can find a lot of, for example, when I started, I did something similar to what Leonardo said. I went to GitHub and I just wrote Quarto presentation or something like that, and there's a lot of like skeleton presentations or things you can just copy and dismantle and see how things works. I think that's a good way to start.
Yeah, I
If
think
all
one
of
of the
this,
sorry.
yeah.
One of the benefits with the Quarto community is that people tend to be pretty committed to the open source side of things. So people like, I've never seen someone show like a Quarto output and not also show the source code. It's like not really the done thing. So you can always see how, like if you see something really cool that looks like it's been done in Quarto, you can usually dig into it and see how they did it. Yeah, but I think we'll open up to, well, let me just flag one more thing. Yep, next week we'll be doing a much more hands-on workshop with plenty of time to go through questions. Cecilia is going to be running that one. So that's a week from tomorrow. Again, you do have to be a SORTEE member for that. So go ahead, join up and you'll get your hands on the link. The workshop and webinar series has another webinar the day after tomorrow from the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, doing a webinar on DISMAP, a distribution mapping software for fish. So that information on that is available on the website. So go ahead and sign up for that. From there, yeah, just opening up the floor for any questions.
Next next week, 8 p.m.
Yeah,
AM, like today, exactly the same time schedule as today. Yeah,
Thanks.
8 a.m. UTC. Yes.
Yeah. I have a question also. Just a comment if you have any comment in regards of I'm using Quarto. I enjoy a lot, but since I collaborate with others co-authors, then I struggle in terms of rendering in Word. There's a lot of mismatching, for example, with the mathematical formula. Yesterday, I realized that overleaf is something quite useful because it allows to comment on the rendered document. But do you have any insight in terms of what are you doing with your Quarto document when you want to share this preliminary analysis or manuscript with co-authors?
yeah, for sure. So yeah, I write all of my papers in Quarto now, partly because we didn't touch on it. The reference manager is really nice and makes formatting citations really easy. I think that the rendering to Word can be a bit of a pain. So I'm trying to open up it's being a pain. Often what I'll do is I'll send my supervisors two documents together. So I'll send them the HTML version of the paper, which is rendered in full and looks visually nice. Again, the reference is working as links there is really convenient. So I'll send them that nice looking HTML document, and then I'll also send them the Word document even with its flaws and things. And I'll have them put the comments on the Word document, but I implement those changes in Quarto. I also find, I don't know, it might just be a me thing. I don't like editing scientific manuscripts double spaced. I find it reads really differently to me. So I like being able to see like a finished product that looks pretty much like what it would look like in the journal, right next to like the working double space line number business. So yeah, it is a downside that like not being able to work directly on the same thing. But yeah, that's just a workflow I use. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Cecilia.
I just wanted to add, it's exactly what you said. It's hard to find one way that works for everybody, because you might have a supervisor who doesn't, for example, have RStudio, doesn't work with RStudio. So that could also be a way, right? You can share the source code and the whole manuscript. But then if you have somebody who doesn't know what to do with it, then it's hard. Then you have to share the rendered product, and then commenting on that, it's quite complicated. So I think it's really necessary for you to find a workflow that works for you. But I also understand that that's a trial and error process, right? Because you can try something and then say, ah, no, this really is a mess and I cannot do this anymore. And then you go to another like back and forth. So yeah, I also do not have a definite way to do things. From my side, I still rely also on Word documents, mostly like Google Docs, and because I with the collaborators I have, they all use different things, and that's the only one we can work on together. But then, yes, then I implement those changes in RStudio once I have the comment. So yeah, I also don't have a great answer. Probably that's not what you wanted to hear, but it's complicated. Yes.
Thanks, because it feels like I'm not alone also in this struggle and fight. But just if I can, another question. In last week, I was actualizing my curriculum vitae, and there's a package called vitae that is more like, but is using R Markdown. So the skeleton, as Cecilia was saying, that the skeleton is in R Markdown, and it seems that they are not, yeah, at the moment willing to make this transition from R Markdown to Quarto. What are the benefits to stay within to maintain an ARC Markdown file, and what I need to take into account if I want to actualize my curriculum, and then maybe it's better to start from the scratch from Quarto, and trying to catch up some tips.
So Quarto is still being, or sorry, our Markdown is still being supported. It's just not really being actively developed. I think most of the main components of that whole R Markdown atmosphere have moved over to Quarto. I think it's a matter of time for, I think either they're going to, I don't think many people are going to keep developing for R Markdown and refusing to move to Quarto. It's just like, there was a time a couple years ago when it made sense to stick with R Markdown for a bit longer. I think that's kind of fading away. I think Quarto is pretty fully succeeding R Markdown. I think that's the intent of the teams that have worked on those products. Yeah, it's a bit surprising they haven't done it. I do maintain my CV in Quarto now, mostly just as a basic document. There are some good templates. Another one I didn't mention, Quarto is these days one of the easier ways to do a personal website. So I desperately need to update this. So don't look too close, but like personal websites are really easy to build on Quarto. This was just like a working project. I haven't actually finished this yet, but like it's easy to stick things up there and all that. But yeah, it's yeah, I imagine it's a matter of time. I'm sure there's some form of Quarto CV extension out there. because I've seen a few that were written in Quarto.
Thanks, thanks.
So there's a question in the chat from Pat Bayar. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Do you want to unmute and ask it, or should I just read it? If you want, you can.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. That was great. I was just wondering whether the Quarto is a hybrid between RShiny and Markdown. It seems like to me, but I have never experienced this new tool, and I was just wondering. And
Yes.
what are the main key advantages over R Markdown? Yeah, that's basically the question.
Yeah, so Quarto, you can think of Quarto as the next generation R Markdown. So it's kind of part of a bigger trend from the people who make tools like RStudio and Quarto, moving towards multi-language tools. So it's part of the same reason that the company used to be called RStudio, now it's called Posit. That's because they also want to develop for Python. So they're really embracing a lot of that like multi-language data science stuff now. So Quarto's main reason for being, I think, is the ability to support R and Python equally. So Quarto functionally is, it's the same conceptually as R Markdown. I'd say it replaces R Markdown for most cases. Shiny is slightly different. So Shiny is a tool for interactive R code. So the unique feature of Shiny is that you have the document that you're looking at with like all the figures and things, and then you have the server that's rendering those documents, and those go back and forth. So you can change something in the document, it updates on the server, which shows back up in the document. So that's what Shiny does. Shiny actually works within Quarto. So you can make a Quarto dashboard that uses Shiny code. For example, if I go into this gallery, yeah. So this penguins thing is a Shiny app. But it's a Shiny app that's written in like a Quarto framework. So like the web page here, like the way it looks if it ever opens, is going to be made in Quarto. So like the way everything here looks would have been written in Quarto, like these options on the sidebar, the locations of these plots, these panels. But the ability for it to like change these visualizations and update, that's being driven by Shiny. So I'd say like they work together very nicely. It's the best way these days to make like a dashboard in R would be to make like the skeleton of it and the shape of it in Quarto, and then have like Shiny code inside that document doing the interactivity. Sorry, I hope that makes sense, sort of. But...
Yeah, thanks. Great. Yeah, I understand it now. Thank you.
There is a very great comment from Peter about the discussion we were having for collaborations. He says, for allowing reviewing commenting with collaborators who don't use R or Quarto, you can also render to PDF and keep the text file, then upload this to Overleaf. So that's another option for who works with Overleafs or Datex.
Yeah, cool.
Great, thank you very much for this.
Cool. All right. Any last minutes before we wrap it up?
Maybe I do have a question that is like mostly because so with the people I talk to, usually they have a great, so either they have been working with R Markdown or with RStudio, but they never heard of Quarto. And so it's a bit like too much. There's a lot of documentations, maybe it could be a bit overwhelming. So you've been working with Quarto for a long time, but maybe what I would like to share with other people is like how steep is the learning curve if you don't know anything about Quarto and then you want to start making a manuscript, for example. What would be your take?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I'd say if they've used R Markdown, the basic stuff is exactly the same. There's no difference. There's no difference to the point that if you have a .rmd file, you can change the R to the Q and it should still run. Like it's functionally identical for most things. If they haven't really worked with any of that at all, the thing I would say is to stick to a single document type to get started. Only focus on the HTML document type. Don't bother with the presentations. Don't bother with Word and PDF because they're finicky and it can be a little tricky to get things going. The HTML document type is the most straightforward. And yeah, the get started guides on Quarto are good. But if you're just doing those HTML documents, this section is really most of what you need. In addition to like the authoring and computation sections, just going through the HTML basics stuff is going to cover a huge amount of material. Like there's some advanced stuff in there, but like you can find the different things that you're going to need in these areas. So yeah, I'd say focusing on that, and then once you get a grip on what the different elements of like a Quarto element or Quarto document look like, then you can start branching out into other things like the dashboards or the presentations. But yeah, just keeping it simple at first, I think is the big thing. Because yeah, it's a gigantic tool. I think what's the word? Not misleading. It looks more overwhelming than it is sometimes, I think, because it's like the fundamentals of it are all the same. Like it's like at its core, it's using all the same bits and pieces to do a bunch of different things. And like there's little unique things that only matter for Shiny dashboards or only matter for Reveal JavaScript presentations, but at its core, it's the same stuff. So learning the fundamentals in one document will be the biggest part of the learning curve, and then you can transfer that to the other bits. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. And again, Coding Club is a week from tomorrow, same time, 8 a.m. UTC. So yeah, hopefully see you there. And we'll